The woman with the hammer raised above her shoulder looked like she was about to fight the very earth itself. And Thomas Nathaniel knew in that instant his afternoon had just changed direction. He had been riding through the New Mexico territory, just outside Kingston, when he spotted her. The year was 1883, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty landscape. His horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Ruby, had been carrying him for hours, and he had been looking forward to reaching town for a cool drink and a hot meal. But something about the sight of this woman, alone on a piece of land that stretched endlessly in all directions, made him slow Ruby to a walk. She wore a simple cotton dress that had seen better days, the hem stained with dirt. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a braid that hung down her back, and even from a distance, Thomas could see the determination in her posture. She was trying to drive a fence post into the ground, but the rocky soil was fighting her every inch of the way. Thomas guided Ruby closer, taking his hat off as he approached. "Madam," he called out, his voice carrying across the open space, "looks like you could use a hand." The woman turned, and Thomas felt something shift in his chest. She was beautiful, not in the delicate way of the women in the saloon paintings, but in a way that spoke of strength and resilience. Her face was flushed from exertion, and there was a smudge of dirt on her cheek. Her eyes, a striking green, assessed him with a mixture of wariness and hope. "I appreciate the offer, stranger," she said, lowering the hammer, "but I do not have money to pay for help." Thomas dismounted, tying Ruby's reins to a scrubby juniper bush. "Did not ask for payment, madam, just offering what any decent man would offer." She studied him for a long moment, and Thomas felt exposed under that gaze. He was 30 years old, weathered by years of riding and working cattle. His dark hair needed a trim, and his clothes were dusty from the trail. He was not much to look at, he knew, but he was honest, and he hoped she could see that. "My name is Laura Peterson," she finally said, extending a hand that was marked with fresh blisters. "Thomas Nathaniel," he replied, taking her hand gently. Her grip was firm despite the obvious pain it must have caused her. "But most folks call me Tom." Laura gestured to the partially built fence that stretched about 20 feet before ending abruptly. "As you can see, I am attempting to fence my property. The land is mine, legally purchased with money I saved for years. But the ground is harder than I anticipated, and my progress has been slower than I hoped." Thomas walked along the fence line, examining her work. The posts she had managed to get in were straight and true, showing that she knew what she was doing even if she lacked the physical strength to do it efficiently. "You are doing fine work," he said honestly, "but this soil needs more than a hammer. You need a proper post hole digger and someone with the weight to drive these posts deep." "I have a post hole digger," Laura said, pointing to where a rusty tool lay in the dirt. "But every hole I dig fills with rocks before I can get the post in properly." Thomas picked up the tool, testing its weight. "How much fence were you planning to build?" Laura's expression shifted to something vulnerable, and Thomas saw the exhaustion behind her determined facade. "I need to fence the entire property, 5 acres. The neighboring rancher, Silas Morton, has been trying to convince me to sell since I arrived 3 months ago. His cattle keep wandering onto my land, and he claims it is an accident, but I know better. He thinks a woman alone cannot manage out here." 5 acres is a substantial amount of fencing, Thomas said, doing the calculations in his head. "That is going to take more than an afternoon." Laura's shoulders slumped slightly. "I know. I have been working on it for 2 weeks, and this is as far as I have gotten." She gestured to the pitiful 20 feet of fence. Thomas looked at the sun, then back at Laura. He had been planning to move on to find work further west, but something about this woman and her situation pulled at him. Maybe it was the way she stood her ground despite the odds. Maybe it was the flash of defiance in her eyes when she mentioned the neighbor trying to push her out. Or maybe it was something deeper, something he did not want to examine too closely just yet. "I tell you what," he said, setting down his hat and rolling up his sleeves. "Let me help you get a proper start on this fence. I have built more fences than I can count, and I know the tricks to making it go faster." "But you said you were not asking for payment," Laura said, confusion crossing her features. "Surely you have somewhere else to be." Thomas picked up the post hole digger and positioned it at the next mark she had made in the dirt. "Nowhere that cannot wait, and I meant what I said about not needing payment. Consider it neighborly assistance." For a moment, Laura looked like she might argue, but then she nodded. "I have water in the house, and if you stay through supper, I can at least feed you properly." "That sounds fair," Thomas agreed and began to dig. The work was hard, exactly as Thomas had expected. The New Mexico soil was rocky and unforgiving, and each post hole required careful excavation. But Thomas had done this work countless times before, and he fell into a steady rhythm. Laura worked alongside him, clearing rocks from the holes and steadying the posts as he tamped the dirt around them. As they worked, they talked. Thomas learned that Laura had come from Missouri, leaving behind a life that had become unbearable after her father died, and her older brother decided to sell the family farm without consulting her. She had taken her small inheritance and headed west, determined to build something of her own. "My father always said that land was the only thing worth having," Laura said as she handed Thomas another post. "He said that if you owned land, you had security. You had a future." "Smart man," Thomas replied, positioning the post and beginning to tamp the dirt. "Though land out here comes with its own challenges." "I am learning that," Laura said with a rueful smile, "but I am not sorry I came. Even with the difficulties, this is mine. No one can take that away from me." Thomas understood that sentiment more than she knew. He had spent most of his adult life working other people's land, following other people's orders. He had saved money, dreaming of one day having his own place, but the dream always seemed just out of reach. As the afternoon wore on, they made significant progress. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they had added 30 more feet of fence to Laura's original 20. It was not much in the grand scheme of things, but it was more than triple what she had managed in 2 weeks. "You have a gift for this," Laura said as they stepped back to admire their work. "Just experience," Thomas replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I have worked on ranches from Texas to Colorado. You learn a thing or two." Laura looked at him curiously. "What brings you to New Mexico?" "Work, mostly," Thomas said. "I heard there were opportunities in the silver mines around here. Figure I could earn some good money and maybe buy some land of my own someday." "The mines are dangerous," Laura said, concern evident in her voice. "I've heard terrible stories about collapses and accidents." Thomas shrugged. "Most work has its dangers, but a man has to make his way somehow." Laura was quiet for a moment, then said, "Come inside. I will cook us some supper and you can wash up." The house was small, just 2 rooms really, but Laura had made it comfortable. There was a wood stove in the main room that served as both kitchen and living area, and a curtained doorway that presumably led to her bedroom. The furniture was simple but well maintained, and there were touches that showed Laura's personality. Wildflowers in a jar on the table, a quilt draped over the back of a chair that showed expert stitching. Thomas washed his hands and face in the basin Laura provided, and by the time he sat down at the small table, she had prepared a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork. "This is wonderful," Thomas said after the first bite, and he meant it. After days of his own poor cooking on the trail, Laura's meal tasted like something from a fancy restaurant. "It is nothing special," Laura said, but she looked pleased by the compliment. "I wish I had more to offer after all the help you have given me." "You have offered plenty," Thomas assured her. "Good food and good company." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and then Laura asked, "Where is your family, Tom?" Thomas felt the familiar pang that always came with that question. "My mother died when I was 12. My father was a railroad worker, died in an accident when I was 17. I have a sister somewhere back east, married to a banker. We write occasionally, but we are not close." "I am sorry," Laura said softly. "Family should be close." "Should be," Thomas agreed. "But life does not always work out the way it should." Laura nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My mother died giving birth to me. My brother blamed me for that, I think. He never said it outright, but I could see it in the way he looked at me. When father died and my brother sold the farm, he gave me barely enough money to buy this land, said it was more than I deserved." Thomas felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of someone treating Laura that way. He was wrong. "Yes," Laura said simply. "He was." After supper, Thomas helped Laura clean up, and then she walked him out to where Ruby was still tied to the juniper bush. The night air was cool, a relief after the heat of the day, and the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Thank you for your help today," Laura said. "You made more progress in a few hours than I managed in 2 weeks." "I was happy to help," Thomas said, meaning it. He untied Ruby's reins but found himself reluctant to mount up and ride away. "I could come back tomorrow if you would like, help you get more of the fence built." Laura looked surprised. "You would do that?" "I would," Thomas confirmed. "Like I said, I am in no particular hurry to get to the mines, and this is good work, honest work." A slow smile spread across Laura's face, and Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. "I would appreciate that very much. Though I insist on paying you somehow, perhaps not with money but with meals at least." "That is more than fair," Thomas agreed. "I will be back at sunrise." As he rode toward Kingston in the gathering darkness, Thomas found himself thinking about Laura's smile, the determination in her eyes, the way she had not given up despite the enormous task ahead of her. He told himself he was just being helpful, just doing what any decent man would do. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He had felt something today, working beside Laura, talking with her, seeing the home she was trying to build. It was a feeling he had not experienced before, a sense of belonging, of purpose. And for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel allowed himself to hope that maybe his future held more than just working other people's land and dreaming of something better. The next morning, Thomas was at Laura's property as the sun painted the horizon pink and gold. He had spent the night in Kingston's small boarding house, but he had been too restless to sleep much. His mind kept returning to Laura, to the fence they were building, to the future she was trying to create. Laura was already outside when he arrived, and she greeted him with a genuine smile that made the early morning ride worthwhile. "I was afraid you might not come," she admitted as he dismounted. "I said I would," Thomas replied simply. "I keep my word." "That is a rare quality," Laura said. They worked through the morning, falling into an easy rhythm. Thomas dug the post holes while Laura prepared the posts and cleared rocks. They talked as they worked, learning more about each other with each passing hour. Thomas discovered that Laura could read and write better than most men he knew, that she had a sharp mind for numbers, and that she had plans to eventually start raising chickens and maybe a few pigs. She wanted to be self-sufficient, to never have to depend on anyone who might let her down. Laura learned that Thomas had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh unexpectedly, that he had once wanted to be a schoolteacher, but circumstances had pushed him toward ranch work instead. and that he had a surprising knowledge of literature from the books his mother had read to him as a child. By midday, they had made impressive progress. Another 40 feet of fence stood strong and true, and they were both feeling optimistic about completing the project. At this rate, we might actually finish the entire fence in a week or so, Laura said, excitement in her voice. Might take a bit longer than that, Thomas cautioned, not wanting to dampen her enthusiasm but wanting to be realistic. 5 acres is a lot of perimeter, but yes, we will get it done. They took a break for lunch, sitting in the shade of Laura's house with cold water and sandwiches she had prepared. "Can I ask you something?" Laura said, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Of course. Why are you really doing this?" "I mean, I appreciate the help more than I can say, but most men would have ridden on after offering once. What makes you stay?" Thomas considered the question carefully. He could give her a simple answer, something about having time before starting work in the mines, or about liking the honest work. But sitting there with Laura, her green eyes watching him with genuine curiosity, he found himself wanting to tell the truth. "I suppose I see something in what you are doing," he said slowly. "You are building something real, something lasting. And you are doing it despite everyone telling you that you cannot. That takes courage. I admire that. And maybe I want to be part of something like that, even if just for a little while." Laura was quiet for a moment, and then she said softly, "It does not have to be just for a little while." Thomas looked up sharply, but before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses made them both turn. 3 riders were coming toward the property, and even from a distance, Thomas could see they were not friendly visitors. The man in the lead was large and imposing, sitting his horse like a king surveying his domain. The 2 men flanking him had the look of hired hands, the kind who were more comfortable with guns than with honest work. "That is Silas Morton," Laura said quietly, standing up. Thomas could hear the tension in her voice. "The neighbor I mentioned." Thomas stood beside her, positioning himself slightly in front of Laura without making it obvious. He had dealt with men like Morton before, men who thought their size and wealth gave them the right to push others around. The 3 riders stopped a few feet away, and Silas Morton looked down at them with barely concealed contempt. He was a man in his 50s, Thomas guessed, with gray threading through his dark hair and a belly that spoke of too much good food and whiskey. "Miss Peterson," Morton said, his voice carrying a false friendliness that fooled no one, "I see you have hired some help." "This is my land, Mr. Morton," Laura said firmly. "I can hire whoever I choose." Of course," Morton said, though his eyes were on Thomas now, assessing. "And who might you be?" "Nathaniel," Thomas replied evenly. "I am helping Miss Peterson build her fence." "Are you now?" Morton's smile did not reach his eyes. "Well, that is interesting, because I have been trying to explain to Miss Peterson here that fencing this land is a waste of time. The soil is too rocky, the weather too harsh. She would be much better off selling to me and moving somewhere more suitable for a woman on her own." "The land is mine," Laura said, her voice sharp, "and I am not interested in selling." Morton's expression hardened. "Now, Miss Peterson, be reasonable. A woman cannot manage land like this alone, and this fence you are building, it is going to cause problems for my cattle. They have always grazed freely through this area. Then you will need to keep them on your own land," Laura said. "My own land," Morton repeated, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "This should be my land. I have been running cattle through here for years. Just because you bought some paper in town does not change the reality of the situation." Thomas stepped forward slightly. "The lady has a legal deed to this property, Mr. Morton. That paper you are dismissing is what makes land ownership legitimate. I suggest you respect that." Morton's eyes narrowed. "I was not talking to you, Cowboy. This is between me and Miss Peterson." "Actually," Thomas said calmly, "since I am working this land, it concerns me too." One of Morton's men, a lean fellow with a scar across his cheek, moved his hand closer to the gun at his hip. Thomas noticed the movement but did not react. He had been in enough tense situations to know that the first person to show fear usually ended up losing. "Are you threatening us, Morton?" Laura asked, her voice steady despite the fear Thomas could see in her eyes. "Not threatening, Miss Peterson," Morton said smoothly. "Just offering some friendly advice. Accidents happen out here. Fences fall down. Houses catch fire. It would be terrible if something happened to you out here all alone." Thomas felt anger surge through him, but he kept his voice level. "Mr. Morton, I think it is time for you to leave. Miss Peterson has made her position clear." Morton stared at Thomas for a long moment, then slowly smiled. "You are just hired help, Nathaniel. When your money runs out, you will move on and Miss Peterson will be alone again. She cannot keep hiring protection forever." "I am not protection," Thomas said. "I am a friend helping a neighbor, and I am not going anywhere anytime soon." Morton's smile faded. "We will see about that." He turned his horse and his two men followed suit. As they rode away, Morton called back, "Think about my offer, Miss Peterson. It is only going to get harder from here." After they left, Laura let out a breath she had been holding. Thomas saw her hands trembling slightly and he gently took her arm. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," Laura said, though her voice shook. "He has made threats before, but never so directly, and he has never brought his men with him." "He is trying to scare you," Thomas said. "Men like him think they can bully anyone smaller or weaker, but you are neither of those things, Laura, and you are not alone anymore." Laura looked up at him, and Thomas saw tears threatening in her eyes. "You do not have to stay, Tom. Morton is dangerous. I do not want you getting hurt because of me." "I am staying," Thomas said firmly. "That fence needs building, and I intend to see it finished. Besides, I meant what I told Morton. I am not going anywhere." The rest of the day was quieter, but the tension from Morton's visit hung in the air. They worked steadily, and by evening they had added another 30 feet to the fence. Progress was good, but Thomas could see that Laura was distracted, jumping at every sound. That night, after another meal at Laura's table, Thomas made a decision. "I am going to make camp here on your property," he told Laura as they stood outside. "Just until the fence is finished and things settle down with Morton." Laura started to protest, but Thomas held up a hand. "It is not about propriety or anything like that. I will camp by the fence line, well away from the house." "But if Morton is making threats, you should not be out here alone at night." "People will talk," Laura said, but Thomas could hear the relief in her voice. "People always talk," Thomas replied, "but your safety is more important than gossip. Besides, I will be camping on the property, not in the house. There is nothing improper about that." Laura nodded slowly. "Thank you, Tom. I hate to admit it, but I have been frightened at night. Every sound makes me wonder if Morton is sending his men to cause trouble." "Then it is settled," Thomas said. "I will ride into town, get my things from the boarding house and set up camp here. I will be back before full dark." He rode to Kingston quickly, collected his bedroll and supplies, and returned to Laura's property as promised. He set up camp near the fence line, far enough from the house to be respectable but close enough to hear if anything went wrong. As he lay in his bedroll that night, looking up at the star-filled sky, Thomas realized that something fundamental had shifted in his life. 2 days ago, he had been a drifter with no particular ties, heading toward work in the mines because it was as good an option as any. Now, he was protecting a woman he barely knew, building a fence that would help her keep her land, and feeling more content than he had in years. He thought about Laura's smile, the way she laughed at his jokes, the determination in her eyes when she faced down Morton. He thought about the meals they had shared, the easy way they worked together, the comfortable silences that felt as natural as breathing. Thomas Nathaniel had never been a man who believed in fate or destiny. Life had taught him that you made your own way through hard work and persistence. But lying there under the New Mexico stars, he could not help but think that riding past Laura's property 2 days ago had been the luckiest decision of his life. The next few days fell into a comfortable pattern. Thomas would wake at dawn, tend to Ruby, and join Laura for breakfast. They would work on the fence through the morning and afternoon, taking breaks for lunch and water. Laura proved to be a quick learner, and soon she was helping with tasks that required more skill than just clearing rocks. Thomas taught her how to properly set a post so it would withstand years of cattle leaning against it, how to stretch wire tight enough to be effective, but not so tight it would snap in the winter cold, how to brace corner posts for maximum strength. Laura absorbed everything like a sponge, asking intelligent questions and remembering the answers. As they worked, they continued to learn about each other. Thomas discovered that Laura had a beautiful singing voice, which she used to pass the time as they worked. Laura learned that Thomas could identify birds by their calls and knew the names of all the wildflowers that dotted the landscape. They talked about their dreams and fears. Laura confessed that she sometimes wondered if she had made a mistake coming out here alone. But then she would look at the land and feel a sense of peace she had never experienced back in Missouri. Thomas admitted that he had always felt like he was searching for something, moving from place to place, but never finding what he was looking for. Until now, he added quietly, and Laura had blushed and smiled. The fence grew steadily. By the end of the first week, they had completed nearly half the perimeter. It was back-breaking work, but satisfying in a way that Thomas had not expected. Each post they set, each length of wire they stretched, was a tangible sign of progress. On the 8th day, as they were working on a particularly stubborn section of ground, Laura suddenly asked, "What will you do when the fence is finished?" Thomas paused, his post hole digger halfway into the ground. It was a question he had been avoiding thinking about because the answer made him uncomfortable. "I suppose I should look for work," he said slowly. "I have been spending my savings being here. Eventually, I will need to earn some money." Laura was quiet for a moment. "The fence will be finished in another week, maybe less at this pace, and then you will move on." There was something in her voice, a sadness that Thomas recognized because he felt it too. The thought of leaving, of not seeing Laura every day, of not working beside her and sharing meals and talking about everything and nothing, filled him with a hollow feeling. "I do not want to leave," Thomas said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Laura looked up at him, hope and uncertainty mixing in her expression. "You do not." "No," Thomas said firmly. He set down the post hole digger and moved closer to Laura. "I know I have only been here a short time, but these past 8 days have been the best I can remember. Working with you, helping you build something real, it feels right. It feels like what I have been searching for all these years." "Tom," Laura said softly, and he could see tears glistening in her eyes. "I am not a rich man," Thomas continued. "I do not own land or have much to offer. But I am honest, and I am hardworking, and I care about you, Laura, more than I probably should after such a short time." "I care about you too," Laura said, her voice barely above a whisper. "These past days have been the happiest I have had since coming here, maybe the happiest I have ever had. When I think about you leaving, it feels like losing something precious before I even really had it." Thomas reached out and gently took Laura's hand. Her palm was rough with calluses from the work, but to him it was perfect. "Then maybe I do not have to leave. Maybe we can figure out something else." "What do you mean?" Laura asked. "I mean," Thomas said carefully, "that you have land but need help working it, and I need land to work but do not have any of my own. Maybe we could be partners. I could help you build this place into something successful. We could raise those chickens you talked about, maybe get some cattle eventually, build something together." Laura's eyes widened. "You would want to stay here, work this land with me." "I would," Thomas said, "if you would have me. But what about the mines? You said you needed to make money." "The mines can wait," Thomas said. "Or maybe I do not need them at all. If we work together, we can make this place profitable. It will not be easy and it will not be quick, but I believe we can do it." Laura looked at their joined hands, then back up at Thomas. "People will talk. A man and woman living on the same property without being married." Thomas felt his heart beating faster. "Then maybe we should not give them reason to talk." Laura's breath caught. "Tom, are you asking what I think you are asking?" Thomas realized that he was, and the rightness of it hit him like a physical force. He had known Laura for only 8 days, but in that time she had become essential to him. The thought of a future without her was unbearable. "Laura Peterson," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I know this is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to stay here, build this place with you, face whatever comes together. Would you consider marrying me?" For a long moment, Laura just stared at him, and Thomas felt panic rising. He had moved too fast, assumed too much. But then a slow smile spread across her face, the most beautiful smile Thomas had ever seen. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Tom, I will marry you." Relief and joy flooded through Thomas, and he pulled Laura into his arms, holding her close. She fit perfectly against him, and when she rested her head on his chest, he felt like he had finally found home. They stood like that for a long moment, and then Laura pulled back slightly to look up at him. "I did not expect this when you rode up 8 days ago offering to help with my fence." "Neither did I," Thomas admitted, "but sometimes the best things in life are the ones you do not expect." "We should go to town tomorrow," Laura said practically, though her eyes still sparkled with emotion. "Talk to the pastor about getting married. The sooner we do it, the less gossip there will be about you staying here." "Agreed," Thomas said. "Though I want you to know, Laura, that I am not asking to marry you just to make things proper. I am asking because I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you fighting with that fence post." Laura laughed, a sound that Thomas wanted to hear every day for the rest of his life. "I love you too, Tom. You have given me something I did not know I needed, a partner, someone to build a life with. I came out here thinking I wanted to do everything alone to prove I could. But now I realize that sharing this with someone, building something together, is so much better." They sealed their engagement with a kiss, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were grinning like fools. "We should probably get back to work on this fence," Laura said, though she made no move to step away from Thomas. "Probably," Thomas agreed, equally reluctant to let go of her. "But first, tell me again that you will marry me. I want to make sure I did not dream this whole conversation." Laura laughed again. "I will marry you, Thomas Nathaniel. Now, can we please finish this fence so we can start the rest of our lives?" They returned to work with renewed energy, and the hours flew by. By the time the sun began to set, they had made incredible progress, fueled by excitement and happiness. That evening, after supper, they sat outside Laura's house making plans. They would go to town the next day and speak to the pastor. They would have a simple ceremony, just the two of them and whoever they could find to witness it. There was no need for anything fancy. They just wanted to make their commitment official. "After we are married, you can move into the house," Laura said. "It is small, but we can add on another room eventually." I have some carpentry skills, Thomas said. We can build whatever you need, and once the fence is done, we should think about what crops will grow best in this soil. We will need some income while we get the place established. They talked late into the night, planning their future together. When Thomas finally walked back to his camp by the fence line, he felt like he was floating. In just over a week, his entire life had changed. He had gone from a lonely drifter to an engaged man with a purpose and a future. The next morning, they rode into Kingston together. The town was small but bustling, the center of activity for the surrounding ranches and mines. They tied their horses outside the small white church and found Pastor Richards inside, an older man with kind eyes who had been serving the community for years. "Miss Peterson," he greeted Laura warmly. "I have not seen you in church in a few weeks." "I have been busy with the property, Pastor," Laura explained. "But I am here now for an important reason. This is Thomas Nathaniel. We would like you to marry us." Pastor Richards looked surprised but pleased. "This is wonderful news. When were you thinking of having the ceremony?" "As soon as possible," Thomas said. "Today, if that can be arranged." The pastor's eyebrows rose. "Today? That is quite soon. Might I ask how long you two have known each other?" Laura and Thomas exchanged a glance, and Laura spoke honestly. "We have known each other for 9 days, Pastor." "I know it seems fast, but we are certain about this. Tom has been helping me build my fence, and in that time, we have come to care deeply for each other. We want to build a life together." Pastor Richard studied them both carefully. "Marriage is a serious commitment, not something to enter into lightly. Even if you have strong feelings for each other, 9 days is very little time to truly know someone." "You are right," Thomas acknowledged. "But I have lived 30 years learning what kind of man I want to be. And in these 9 days with Laura, I have found someone who makes me want to be a better version of that man. I know my own heart, Pastor, and I know I want to spend my life with her." "And I want to spend mine with him," Laura added firmly. "I came to New Mexico to build something of my own, and I thought that meant doing everything alone. But Tom has shown me that building something together is stronger and better than going it alone. Please, Pastor, we know what we want." The pastor was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "I have been performing marriages for 30 years, and I have learned that sometimes the strongest unions are the ones that seem the most unlikely. If you are both certain, then I will marry you today, but I will need 2 witnesses." "We can find witnesses," Thomas said, relief flooding through him. They walked to the general store where the owner, a friendly woman named Mrs. Davis, was delighted to serve as a witness when they explained the situation. They found their second witness in the form of the blacksmith, a large man named Henry who had done some work for Laura on her wagon and was happy to help. An hour later, Thomas and Laura stood before Pastor Richards in the small church. Laura had bought a new dress from Mrs. Davis, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Thomas had cleaned up as best he could and bought a new shirt. They might not have the fancy wedding that some couples had, but neither of them cared about that. What mattered was the words they spoke to each other, the promises they made. Thomas vowed to love and support Laura, to be her partner in all things, to build a life with her that would honor them both. Laura promised the same, her voice steady and sure. When Pastor Richards pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Laura gently, and the small gathering applauded. They signed the marriage certificate, and just like that, they were legally bound together. Mrs. Davis insisted on hosting a small celebration at her home, and they spent the afternoon with her family and a few other townspeople who had heard about the wedding and wanted to offer congratulations. It was simple and warm, and Thomas felt welcomed into the community in a way he never had before. As the sun began to set, Thomas and Laura rode back to their property. Their property now, Thomas thought with satisfaction. They were partners in every sense of the word. That night, Thomas moved his things into the house. It felt strange and wonderful to be inside instead of camped by the fence, to share the small space with Laura, to know that this was now his home too. They lay together in the small bed, Laura's head on Thomas's chest, listening to each other breathe. Outside, the night was full of the sounds of the desert, crickets chirping, a distant coyote howling, the wind rustling through the scrub brush. "Are you happy?" Laura asked softly. "More than I knew it was possible to be," Thomas replied honestly. "Are you?" "Yes," Laura said. "Though I will admit I am a little nervous about what comes next. We are married now, partners in this land and this life. That is a big responsibility." "We will face it together," Thomas said. "That is what makes it manageable. Whatever challenges come, we will meet them as a team." Laura tilted her head up to look at him. "I love you, Tom. I know I said it earlier, but I want to make sure you know it is true. Not just words, but truth." "I know," Thomas said, kissing her forehead. "And I love you too, Laura. Not just for your strength or your determination, though I admire those things, but for you, for who you are. You make me want to be the best version of myself." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Thomas slept better than he had in years. The next morning, they returned to work on the fence with renewed purpose. This was not just Laura's fence anymore. It was theirs. They were building something together, exactly as Thomas had said when he proposed. The work went faster now that Thomas was fully invested in the property's success. He pushed himself harder, and Laura matched his energy. They worked from sunup to sundown, taking breaks only when absolutely necessary. On the 12th day after Thomas had first ridden up to Laura's property, they set the final post. The fence was complete, all 5 acres enclosed with strong, straight fencing that would keep Morton's cattle out and protect what was theirs. They stood together, looking at what they had built, and Laura had tears running down her face. "We did it," she said in wonder. "I thought it would take months, maybe longer, but we actually did it." "You did most of it," Thomas said. "You started this before I ever arrived. You had the vision and the determination. I just helped make it happen faster." "No," Laura said firmly. "We did this together. That is what makes it beautiful." Thomas understood what she meant. The fence itself was just wood and wire, practical and necessary. But what it represented was so much more. It was a symbol of their partnership, of what they could accomplish together. It was the foundation for everything they would build in the future. That night, they celebrated with a special supper Laura prepared using supplies Thomas had bought in town. They talked about the future, about what they wanted to accomplish on their land. "I think we should start with chickens," Laura said. "We can build a coop against the side of the house. Chickens will give us eggs to sell in town, and eventually we can raise them for meat." "Good idea," Thomas agreed. "And I think we should plant a garden. The soil is rocky, but we can amend it with compost. Fresh vegetables will help us save money and maybe give us extra to sell." "What about cattle?" Laura asked. "Eventually, I mean. I know they are expensive." "We will need to save up," Thomas said. "But yes, eventually we should get some cattle. Maybe start with just a few head and build from there. We have the grazing land now that it is fenced." They made plans late into the night, excited about the possibilities. For the first time in their lives, both of them had something that was truly theirs, something they were building together. The next few weeks were busy as they worked to improve the property. Thomas built a sturdy chicken coop, and Laura bought 6 hens and a rooster from a farmer outside town. The chickens settled in well, and soon they were producing eggs daily. Thomas broke ground for a garden, spending days clearing rocks and working compost into the soil. Laura planted seeds she had been saving: tomatoes, beans, squash, carrots, and herbs. They watered carefully, protecting the young plants from the harsh sun. One morning, about a month after their marriage, Thomas was repairing a section of fence when he saw riders approaching. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle he now kept nearby, but he relaxed slightly when he recognized Sheriff Anderson from Kingston riding in front. Laura came out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Thomas moved to stand beside her as the sheriff and his deputy dismounted. "Morning, Mr. and Mrs. Nathaniel," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. He was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Morning, Sheriff," Thomas replied. "What brings you out here?" "Couple of things," Anderson said. "First, wanted to check on you folks. Had a complaint from Silas Morton saying you were building fences across his grazing land." Thomas felt anger rise but kept his voice calm. "This land belongs to my wife, Sheriff. Legally purchased and deeded. We are not blocking anyone's grazing land except our own." "I know that," the sheriff said. "I checked the records myself. Wanted to come out here and verify the fence boundaries, though, make sure everything is proper." "Of course," Laura said. "We followed the property lines exactly. Would you like to see the deed?" "Already saw it at the land office," Anderson said. "But I appreciate the offer. Mind if my deputy and I ride the fence line just to make sure?" "Not at all," Thomas said. "We have nothing to hide." The sheriff and his deputy spent the next hour riding the perimeter of the property. When they returned, Anderson looked satisfied. "Everything looks proper to me," he said. "Your fence is well within your property lines. I will let Morton know that his complaint has no merit." "Thank you, Sheriff," Laura said with relief. "There is one more thing," Anderson said, his expression becoming more serious. "I wanted to warn you folks to be careful. Morton is not happy about this fence. He has been in town several times making noise about how you are blocking traditional grazing routes, how a woman has no business owning land, that sort of thing." "Is he threatening us?" Thomas asked. "Nothing I can arrest him for," Anderson admitted, "but I have dealt with men like Morton before. When they do not get their way through intimidation, they sometimes try other methods. Keep your eyes open, and if anything suspicious happens, you come tell me right away." "We will," Thomas promised. After the sheriff left, Thomas and Laura stood together looking at their land. The warning had unsettled them both, but they refused to let fear control their lives. "We knew Morton would not give up easily," Laura said. "Yes," Thomas agreed, "but we are not giving up either. This land is ours and we are going to protect it." They continued with their work, but Thomas made sure to keep his rifle close and his eyes open for trouble. He also made a point of riding into town more often, making sure people saw them as a stable, established couple. The more integrated they were in the community, the harder it would be for Morton to cause problems. As spring turned to summer, the garden began to flourish. Laura's careful tending paid off with healthy plants that produced abundant vegetables. They ate what they needed and sold the surplus in town, building a small but steady income. The chickens were also doing well, producing more eggs than they could use. Laura started selling eggs in town too, and she quickly gained a reputation for having the freshest, best quality eggs around. Thomas took on odd jobs in town when they needed extra cash, using his skills as a carpenter and handyman. He repaired fences for neighbors, built a new porch for the general store, and helped the blacksmith with various projects. People in Kingston began to see them as a solid, hard-working couple. The initial gossip about their quick marriage died down as folks saw how well they worked together and how serious they were about making their land successful. 3 months after their marriage, Laura came to Thomas one evening with news that made his heart skip a beat. "Tom," she said, her face glowing, "I think I am with child." Thomas felt joy surge through him so powerfully it almost knocked him over. He pulled Laura into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Not completely," Laura admitted. "But all the signs are there. I will go see Dr. Williams in town to confirm it, but I am fairly certain." "This is wonderful," Thomas said, pulling back to look at her face. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Laura asked. "I know we have only been married a short time." "Maybe it is too soon." "It is not too soon," Thomas said firmly. "This is perfect. We are building a life together, Laura. A family is part of that." Laura smiled, relief evident on her face. "I am happy too, a little scared but happy." The next day they went to town, and Dr. Williams confirmed what Laura had suspected. She was indeed pregnant, likely about 2 months along. The baby would arrive sometime in late winter or early spring. As they rode home from town, both of them were quiet, processing this new reality. They were going to be parents. Their little family was growing. "We should add that extra room to the house," Thomas said. "The baby will need a place to sleep." "I was thinking the same thing," Laura agreed. "Do we have enough money saved?" Thomas did some quick calculations in his head. "If I take on some extra work in town, and if we are careful with spending, we should be able to afford the lumber and supplies. I can do the work myself." Over the next few months, Thomas worked harder than he ever had in his life. He took every job he could find in town while still maintaining their property. He worked on the room addition in the evenings and on Sundays, slowly but steadily expanding the small house. Laura continued with the garden and the chickens, though Thomas insisted she take things easier as her pregnancy progressed. She resisted at first, but as she grew larger and more tired, she accepted that she could not do everything she used to do. The garden continued to produce through the summer and into the fall. They harvested and preserved everything they could, filling the small root cellar Thomas dug beneath the house with jars of vegetables and dried herbs. In October, Thomas finished the new room. It was small but cozy, with a window that let in the morning light. Laura made curtains from fabric she bought in town, and they ordered a cradle from the carpenter in Kingston. One evening in late November, as they sat by the fire after supper, Laura reached over and took Thomas's hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Thomas asked. "For everything," Laura said. "For stopping to help me that day, for staying, for building this life with me. 6 months ago I was alone and struggling. Now I have a husband I love, a home that is truly ours, and a baby on the way." "You gave me all of that." "We gave it to each other," Thomas corrected gently. "You gave me a purpose, Laura. Before I met you, I was just drifting, working but not really living. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something lasting. I should be thanking you." Laura smiled. "Then we are both grateful. That seems like a good way to start a family." As winter set in, they settled into a comfortable routine. The garden was dormant, but the chickens still laid eggs. Thomas took on indoor work in town, including helping the carpenter with custom furniture orders. The income was steady, and they were able to save a little money for when the baby arrived. Silas Morton had been quiet since the sheriff's visit, but Thomas never fully relaxed. He knew men like Morton did not forget grievances, they just waited for opportunities. That opportunity came in January, during a particularly cold snap when Thomas had gone into town for supplies. He had left early in the morning, planning to be back by afternoon. Laura was 7 months pregnant now, large and uncomfortable but still healthy. Thomas was at the general store, loading supplies into his wagon, when he saw smoke rising in the direction of his property. His blood ran cold, and he abandoned the half-loaded wagon, jumping onto Ruby and riding hard toward home. As he got closer, he could see that the smoke was coming from his property. His worst fears seemed confirmed until he crested the last rise and saw that it was not the house burning but a large pile of brush near the fence line. Laura was standing in the yard with a bucket of water, and Thomas could see several neighbors, including Sheriff Anderson and his deputy. Thomas rode up fast, dismounting before Ruby had fully stopped. "Laura, are you all right?" "I am fine," Laura assured him, though she looked shaken. "Someone set fire to the brush pile you had collected by the south fence. Luckily, I saw the smoke quickly and got help." Sheriff Anderson came over. "The fire is out now, did not spread to the fence or anything else, but it was deliberately set, no question about that." "Morton," Thomas said, anger making his voice tight. "Cannot prove it," Anderson said, "but I agree it seems likely. I am going to ride over to his place and have a talk with him." "I am coming with you," Thomas said. "Tom, no," Laura said, concern in her eyes. "You will just make things worse if you confront him angry." "She is right," the sheriff agreed. "Let me handle this officially. You stay here with your wife, she needs you." Thomas wanted to argue, but one look at Laura's face, pale and frightened, made him reconsider. She did need him here. Making sure she was safe and calm was more important than confronting Morton. "Fine," Thomas said. "But this has to stop, Sheriff. My wife is 7 months pregnant. We cannot be constantly worrying about what Morton might do next." "I understand," Anderson said. "I will make it very clear to Morton that any further incidents will result in arrest and charges. Even if I cannot prove he did this, I can make sure he knows I am watching him." After the sheriff left, Thomas helped the neighbors finish making sure everything was safe. He thanked them for their help, touched by how quickly they had responded to Laura's call for assistance. Once everyone had left, Thomas sat down with Laura at the kitchen table. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. Laura took a breath. "I was hanging laundry when I smelled smoke. I looked around and saw flames by the south fence. I knew you had piled brush there to burn later, but I also knew you had not planned to burn it today. The fire was too big and spreading too fast to be an accident." "Did you see anyone?" Thomas asked. "No," Laura said. "But Tom, I am sure it was deliberate. Someone set that fire while you were in town, probably thinking I would not notice it quickly enough or would not be able to get help in time." Thomas felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm for Laura's sake. "You did everything right. You got help fast and kept yourself safe." "I was so scared," Laura admitted, tears starting to fall. "Not just of the fire, but of what it means. Morton is trying to drive us away. What if next time he goes after the house? What if he waits until we are both inside?" Thomas pulled Laura into his arms, being careful of her swollen belly. "I will not let anything happen to you or our baby. We are going to be more careful. I will not leave you alone anymore. If I have to go to town, you will come with me." "We cannot live in fear," Laura said. "That is what he wants." "We are not going to live in fear," Thomas said firmly, "but we are going to be smart, and we are going to trust that the sheriff will handle this." The next day, Sheriff Anderson returned to tell them he had confronted Morton. The rancher had denied any involvement in the fire, of course, but Anderson had made it clear that any further suspicious incidents would result in serious consequences. "I cannot watch your place all the time," the sheriff admitted, "but I have put the word out in town. People know what is happening and they are on your side. Morton would be foolish to try anything else." "Thank you, Sheriff," Thomas said. After that incident, Thomas was hyper-vigilant. He made sure Laura was never alone, even if it meant she had to come with him on cold days when it would have been more comfortable for her to stay home. He also made a point of getting to know their neighbors better, building relationships that would mean more eyes watching out for trouble. The winter months passed slowly. Laura grew larger and more uncomfortable, but Dr. Williams assured them everything was progressing normally. Thomas finished building a small barn for Ruby and the chickens, giving them better shelter from the winter weather. In early March, on a cool morning when the first hints of spring were appearing in the desert, Laura woke Thomas before dawn. "Tom," she said, her voice tight with pain, "it is time." Thomas was instantly awake, adrenaline surging through him. They had prepared for this moment, had a plan in place, but now that it was happening, he felt panic trying to take hold. "Are you sure?" he asked, though he could see from her face that she was. "Very sure," Laura said. "The pain started about an hour ago. They are getting closer together." Thomas helped Laura get dressed, then ran to saddle Ruby and hitch up the wagon. The ride into Kingston seemed to take forever, even though Thomas pushed the horses as fast as he dared on the rough road. Dr. Williams was ready when they arrived, having been alerted weeks ago that Laura's time was near. He took Laura into his examination room, and Thomas was left to pace in the waiting area. The hours crawled by. Thomas could hear Laura crying out periodically, and each sound made him want to break down the door and be with her. But Dr. Williams had been firm that husbands stayed in the waiting room during births. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Thomas heard a new sound, the cry of a baby. He stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe until Dr. Williams emerged with a tired smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Nathaniel, you have a healthy son." A son. Thomas felt tears spring to his eyes. "And Laura, is she all right?" "She is tired but fine," the doctor assured him. "Come on back." "She is asking for you." Thomas followed the doctor into the room. Laura was propped up in the bed, pale and exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. "Tom," she said softly, "come meet your son." Thomas approached carefully, as if afraid he might disturb some fragile magic. Laura pulled back the blanket slightly, revealing a small red face, eyes squeezed shut, tiny fists waving in the air. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered. "Would you like to hold him?" Laura asked. Thomas carefully took the baby, supporting his head the way Laura showed him. The infant was so small, so fragile, yet when Thomas held him, he felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. "What should we name him?" Laura asked. They had discussed names over the winter but had not made a final decision. Now, looking at his son, Thomas knew exactly what he wanted to call him. "How about Jacob?" he suggested. "After your father." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "Jacob Nathaniel, I love it." They stayed in town for 3 days, letting Laura recover before making the journey back to the property. Mrs. Davis kindly offered them a room in her house, and the community rallied around them with meals and well wishes. When they finally returned home, it was with a sense of having crossed an important threshold. They were not just a couple anymore, they were a family. The first few weeks with Jacob were exhausting. He woke frequently during the night to nurse, and both Thomas and Laura were constantly tired. But they were also happier than ever. Watching Laura with their son, seeing the gentle way she cared for him, made Thomas fall in love with her all over again. Spring arrived in full force, and Thomas had to balance caring for Laura and Jacob with the work that needed to be done on the property. He planted the garden again, repaired winter damage to the fence, and took on enough work in town to keep their finances stable. Laura recovered quickly from the birth, and soon she was back to helping with the daily tasks, though she spent most of her time with Jacob. The baby was growing well, developing a personality that seemed to combine Laura's determination with Thomas's calm nature. One afternoon in late April, when Jacob was about 6 weeks old, Thomas was working in the garden when he saw riders approaching. He tensed, reaching for his rifle, but relaxed when he saw it was Sheriff Anderson again. "Afternoon, Tom," the sheriff said as he dismounted. "Is Laura around?" She is inside with the baby, Thomas said, wiping dirt from his hands. Is something wrong? Actually, I have some news I thought you both should hear, Anderson said. Thomas called for Laura and she came out carrying Jacob. The sheriff smiled at the sight of the baby. Fine-looking boy, he said. Congratulations to you both. Thank you, Laura said. What is this news you have? Anderson's expression turned serious. Silas Morton is leaving the territory. He lost a lot of cattle over the winter and he has been having financial troubles. He is selling his ranch and moving back east. Thomas and Laura exchanged shocked glances. When? Thomas asked. He is packing up now, Anderson said. Should be gone within the week. I wanted you to know because it means you will not have to worry about him causing more problems. Relief washed over Thomas. For months, the threat of Morton had hung over them like a dark cloud. Knowing that threat was gone felt like being able to breathe freely for the first time. That is the best news we could have received, Laura said, tears of relief in her eyes. After the sheriff left, Thomas and Laura stood together in their yard, looking at the land they had worked so hard to build into a home. It is really over, Laura said wonderingly. We can finally just focus on building our life without looking over our shoulders. We can, Thomas agreed. And we have so much to look forward to. This place is going to thrive, Laura. I can feel it. As the months passed, Thomas's prediction proved accurate. Without the threat of Morton hanging over them, they were able to fully invest in improving their property. Thomas built a proper barn, bought 2 young cows, and expanded the chicken coop to accommodate more birds. Laura's egg business grew. She became known throughout Kingston for having the best eggs, and people would specifically seek her out at the weekly market. The garden produced abundantly, and they preserved enough vegetables to last through the winter with plenty left over to sell. Jacob thrived, growing into a happy, healthy baby. By the time his first birthday arrived, he was walking and starting to say his first words. Thomas and Laura threw a small party, inviting the neighbors who had become friends, the people who had helped them when they needed it. As Thomas looked around at the gathering in their yard, at the home they had built, at his wife and son, he felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was what he had been searching for all those years of drifting from place to place. Not just land or work or money, but a sense of belonging, of purpose, of family. That night, after everyone had left and Jacob was asleep in his cradle, Thomas and Laura sat outside watching the stars. Do you ever think about that first day? Laura asked. When you rode up and offered to help with my fence. I think about it all the time, Thomas admitted. It was the luckiest day of my life. Mine too, Laura said. I was so stubborn, so determined to do everything alone. If you had not stopped, if you had not been patient with me, I might still be struggling with that fence. You would have figured it out, Thomas said. You are the strongest person I know. Maybe, Laura said, but it would have taken so much longer and it would have been so much harder. Building this with you has been the greatest joy of my life. We built something beautiful, Thomas said, echoing the thought that had been in his mind since the day they set that last fence post. Not just the fence or the house or the property. We built a life, a family. That is what makes it beautiful. And we are going to keep building, Laura said, her hand moving to rest on her stomach in a gesture that Thomas recognized. Laura, he asked, hope rising in his chest. Are you? She smiled. I think so. It is early yet, but yes, I think we are going to have another baby. Thomas pulled Laura into his arms, joy flooding through him. Another child, another addition to their growing family. It was more than he had ever dreamed possible. The next year brought challenges and blessings in equal measure. Laura's second pregnancy was more difficult than the first, and she had to rest more. Thomas took on even more of the work, but he did not mind. Every task he completed was for his family, for the future they were building together. In late winter, Laura gave birth to their second son. They named him Samuel, and he had Laura's green eyes and a full head of dark hair. Jacob, now almost 2, was fascinated by his baby brother, wanting to help with everything. As Thomas held his second son for the first time, with Jacob climbing on his lap wanting to see, and Laura watching them all with tired but happy eyes, he realized that he had achieved something he had not even known he was seeking. He had found home. The years continued to unfold like the pages of a beloved book. Thomas and Laura worked their land, raised their sons, and became pillars of the Kingston community. They added more cattle to their herd, expanded their garden, and eventually built a larger house when the first one became too small for their growing family. When Jacob was 5 and Samuel was 3, Laura gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. She was the image of her mother, with the same determination and strength even as a baby. The boys doted on their little sister, and Thomas found that having a daughter brought a new dimension to his life, a protective tenderness he had not experienced before. The property prospered. What had started as 5 acres of rocky New Mexico soil had become a thriving homestead. Other settlers in the area would often ask Thomas and Laura for advice on farming and ranching in the difficult climate. They were generous with their knowledge, remembering how isolated Laura had been when she first arrived. Thomas occasionally thought about the man he had been before that day he stopped to help Laura with her fence. That man had been lonely, searching, unsure of his place in the world. He barely recognized himself now. He had become a husband, a father, a landowner, a respected member of the community. More importantly, he had become part of something larger than himself. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Laura with a new fence. Not because the old one needed replacing, but because he wanted to honor the place where their story had truly begun. He built it with the same care and attention he had given that first fence, and when it was complete, he carved their initials into the corner post along with the date they had met. "So we never forget where we started," he explained to Laura as she traced the letters with her fingers. "I could never forget," Laura said, tears in her eyes. "That fence was the beginning of everything." They stood there together, their 3 children playing in the yard nearby, and looked at the land that had become so much more than property. It was their legacy, the physical manifestation of their love and partnership. As the children grew older, Thomas and Laura taught them the value of hard work and the importance of family. Jacob showed an aptitude for working with animals and took over most of the care of the cattle herd. Samuel loved plants and became in charge of the garden, experimenting with new crops and techniques. Rose, despite being the youngest, was fearless and insisted on learning everything her brothers knew. Thomas and Laura watched their children grow with pride and occasional trepidation. Parenting was harder than building fences or tending crops, but it was also more rewarding. Each milestone their children reached, from first words to first day of school to first time helping with a difficult task, felt like a victory. The town of Kingston grew around them. More settlers arrived, drawn by the opportunities in mining and ranching. The small church where Thomas and Laura had been married was replaced by a larger building. The general store expanded. A proper school was built, and all 3 of their children attended. Through it all, Thomas and Laura's partnership remained strong. They still worked side by side, still made decisions together, still found time to sit together under the stars and talk about their dreams and plans. The love that had sparked during those days building a fence had only deepened over the years, becoming something solid and enduring. When Jacob turned 18, He announced that he wanted to start his own small ranch on the western portion of their property. Thomas and Laura gave him 10 acres and helped him build his first house. Watching his son begin his own journey toward independence filled Thomas with bittersweet pride. Samuel, at 16, was talking about going to agricultural college, wanting to learn more advanced farming techniques. Thomas encouraged him, even though the thought of his son being far away was painful. Rose, at 13, declared that she wanted to be a teacher. She had inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's patience, and both Thomas and Laura could see her succeeding in that path. As Thomas approached his 50th birthday, he sometimes reflected on the unexpected path his life had taken. If someone had told that 30-year-old drifter that he would end up with a wife he adored, 3 accomplished children, and a successful homestead, he would not have believed it possible. But it had happened, all because he had stopped to help a woman building a fence one evening when Thomas and Laura were alone after the children had gone to bed. Laura said, "I have been thinking about our legacy." "Our legacy?" Thomas asked, settling into his chair by the fire. "What we are leaving behind," Laura clarified. "Not just the land and the property, but what we have taught our children about love and partnership and building something meaningful." "What brought this on?" Thomas asked gently. "I saw Jacob with his sweetheart today," Laura said with a smile. "The way he looked at her reminded me of how you looked at me that first day. And I realized that we have not just built a homestead, Tom. We have built an example. Our children have seen what it means to be partners, to work together, to support each other. That is going to shape how they approach their own relationships." Thomas reached over and took Laura's hand. 20 years of marriage, and her touch still sent warmth through him. "We have been blessed," he said simply. "We have," Laura agreed, "but we also worked for what we have. The blessings came because we were willing to put in the effort, to commit to each other and to our family." "True," Thomas said, "though I still think the biggest blessing was the day I decided to stop and offer help instead of riding past. And the day I decided to accept that help instead of stubbornly insisting on doing everything alone," Laura added. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling, the house quiet around them. Through the window, Thomas could see the fence line in the moonlight, standing strong after all these years. The fence had long since served its practical purpose of keeping cattle in or out, but its true value was symbolic. Every time Thomas looked at it, he was reminded of those first days with Laura, of the partnership they had forged, of the decision to build something together rather than alone. As the years continued to pass, the Nathaniel family became even more established in Kingston. Jacob married his sweetheart, a kind young woman named Emma, and started his own family. Samuel went to agricultural college and returned with new ideas that helped all the local farmers improve their yields. Rose became a teacher and was beloved by her students. Thomas and Laura became grandparents, a role they embraced with joy. They loved watching Jacob's children play in the same yard where their own children had played, loved teaching the new generation about the land and the animals. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house and yard. There was food and laughter and music. At one point, Thomas stood on the porch looking at the gathering and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Laura came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest man alive," Thomas said. "Look at all of this, Laura. Look at what we created." "We did create it," Laura said. "Together." "Together," Thomas agreed. "That is the secret, is it not? Everything we have accomplished, we did it together." As the celebration continued, Thomas found himself telling the story of how he and Laura met to some of the younger grandchildren. They listened with wide eyes as he described the first day, Laura struggling with the fence, his decision to stop and help, the way they had worked together to build something beautiful. "And you got married after only 9 days?" one of the grandchildren asked in amazement. "We did," Thomas confirmed. "Though I do not necessarily recommend that to everyone. We were fortunate that our quick decision turned out so well, but the real lesson is not about how fast we married. It is about what came after, the commitment to work together to support each other to build a life as partners. Grandpa loved Grandma enough to help her build a fence," another grandchild said solemnly. "That is really romantic," Thomas laughed. "I suppose it is. Though at the time, I just thought I was being helpful." Laura joined them, having overheard the conversation. "Your grandfather did more than help build a fence. He built a life with me, and that has made all the difference." As the sun set on that anniversary celebration, Thomas and Laura stood together by the fence, the very section where they had set those first posts together all those years ago. Their family was gathered nearby, multiple generations representing the legacy they had created. "I would not change a single thing," Laura said softly. "Neither would I," Thomas agreed. "Well, maybe I would have packed more food that first day. I was pretty hungry by evening." Laura laughed, the sound as beautiful to Thomas as it had been 25 years ago. "You were always practical." "Someone had to be," Thomas teased. "You were too stubborn for your own good." "I was determined," Laura corrected. "There is a difference." "Yes, there is," Thomas agreed, pulling her close. "And your determination is one of the things I love most about you." They stood there as the stars began to appear, holding each other, surrounded by the evidence of their love and hard work. The fence stood strong, the house was full of family, the land was prosperous. They had built something beautiful, just as Thomas had said all those years ago. But more than that, they had built it together. And that, Thomas thought, was what made it truly beautiful. Not the fence or the house or the land itself, but the partnership that had created it all, the love that had sustained them through challenges and celebrated with them in triumphs. As he held Laura under the New Mexico stars, Nathaniel knew that stopping to help a woman build a fence had been the best decision of his life. It had led him to love, to family, to a home and a purpose. It had transformed him from a lonely drifter into a man with deep roots and a lasting legacy. And it had all started with a simple offer. "Looks like you could use a hand." Years continued to pass, and Thomas and Laura grew older together with grace and contentment. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated the birth of great-grandchildren, and remained active in the Kingston community for as long as their health allowed. When Thomas was 65, he decided it was time to officially pass the main management of the property to Jacob, though he and Laura continued to live in the house they had built together. Jacob had proven himself more than capable, and Thomas was proud to see his son continuing the legacy they had started. Laura spent her later years teaching the younger women in the community about farming, preserving food, and managing households on the frontier. She became a respected elder, someone people came to for advice and wisdom. On a warm spring evening when Thomas was 72 and Laura was 68, they sat together on the porch of their home. Their bodies were older, movements slower, but their love was as strong as ever. "Do you remember the first time you kissed me?" Laura asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Of course," Thomas said. "It was after the pastor declared us husband and wife. You tasted like hope and new beginnings." "That is very poetic for a cowboy," Laura teased. "I learned from the best," Thomas replied. "You taught me that life could be poetry, that building something with someone you love is its own kind of art." Laura reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally after decades of practice. I never thanked you properly for staying. Staying, Thomas asked. That first day and all the days after, Laura clarified. You could have helped with the fence and moved on. You could have decided at any point that the life we were building was too hard or not exciting enough. But you stayed. You chose me, chose us, every single day. That was the easiest choice I ever made, Thomas said. Though I would argue that we chose each other. You chose to trust me, to accept my help, to build a life with me. That takes courage. We were brave together, Laura said. And we are still brave together, facing whatever comes next. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, they could see their family. Jacob and Emma with their children, Samuel visiting from his own farm with his wife and kids, Rose and her husband settling in for supper. The fence still stood, though it had been repaired and maintained countless times over the years. It remained a symbol of where everything had begun, a reminder of the foundation of their love. As the stars began to appear, Thomas pulled Laura closer to him. I love you, he said simply. I have loved you since the day I saw you fighting with that fence post, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Laura replied. You gave me everything I did not know I needed: partnership, family, a love that grows deeper every day. They stayed on the porch late into the night, holding each other, remembering their journey together, and feeling grateful for every moment they had shared. The fence they had built together all those years ago had long since served its purpose of marking property boundaries. But it remained standing, a testament to what two people could accomplish when they worked together, when they chose love and partnership over fear and solitude. Thomas and Laura Nathaniel had built something beautiful, not just with wood and wire, but with love, commitment, and shared dreams. Their legacy would live on through their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, through the land they had tended, through the community they had served. But more than anything, their legacy was the example they had set. That true love was not just a feeling but a choice made every day, that building a life together required both strength and tenderness, and that the greatest adventures often began with a simple offer to help. As Thomas held Laura under the stars that night, he silently thanked his younger self for having the wisdom to stop his horse that day, to offer his strength to a woman building a fence. That decision had changed everything, had given him a life richer and more meaningful than he ever could have imagined. Together, they had built something beautiful. And together, they would continue to cherish it for whatever time they had left, grateful for every moment, every memory, every fence post that marked the boundaries of their love. The story of Thomas and Laura Nathaniel would be told and retold in Kingston for generations. The cowboy who stopped to help, the woman who accepted that help, and the beautiful life they built together, starting with a fence and growing into a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone.